He's not the only one who looked at those files or has a list. Congresswoman Nancy Mace just spent the day going through the files and says she has her own list too. South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace is here with me now. Thank you very much for being here. So just based on what you saw this week, the Department of Justice opened up a number of files for review at DOJ. You weren't allowed to take in phones, take photos, you could take notes. What did you see that the American people have not?
I took a lot of notes. I saw a lot of names. There was still a lot of information that is redacted. And the excuse I received today, because my primary focus was looking at co-conspirators. I wanted to look at the documents of the people who have not been arrested but were investigated. A lot of that information is still redacted. Or if there was a draft memo of the DOJ about the co-conspirators, you couldn't even pull that document up, even though it was revealed or appeared to be an attachment to one of the emails that were disclosed. I saw names of a lot of women, adult women that were recruiting young women and potentially underage individuals to be, to give to Jeffrey Epstein. Really disgusting behavior. And so, I'm going back tomorrow. And I'm going to give a list of names to the House Oversight Committee of people. I'm not saying that they've done anything criminal. These are people that I want to have brought in and testify and answer some very tough questions. Who was doing what and where? And also, why the cover-up? Why is this still being blocked from Congress and the American people?
Do you have any concerns that the rush to get this information out, which of course transparency people want, that names of people who were not criminals, who were not involved in any of these crimes, or that the names of victims are being put out there unredacted by mistake as a result of this kind of rushed push, and they were. So do you have any worries about people who are saying, I'm an innocent person, and just because my name is listed in there or redacted doesn't mean I'm guilty of a crime, and my reputation should not be sullied as a result of being mentioned in an email?
I'm talking about people who were investigated, who probably, should see some jail time, and women that simply just want justice. And the attorneys for many of these victims gave the DOJ a list of names, and somehow those names still found their way that were not redacted. I am very concerned as a survivor about protecting the personal information, the names of underage children of some of these women that was put out in the public. And it's also, it's shaming, it's victim shaming, it's victim blaming when their names are out there. And I would never want to see that happen. Also, people have due process. They have the right to be innocent until proven guilty. But we're talking about one of the biggest scandals in American history, where basically nobody went to jail. And you can't tell me, as a mom, as a woman, as a survivor, that you had over 1,000 young women or underage girls trafficked and only one accomplice. People knew what was going on. They knew where it was happening, they knew who was doing it. This is a cover-up.
Yeah, I want to get to Virginia's law in a minute and about how that may work on Capitol Hill, but there was this was addressed at the White House today. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. He has come up in these documents, and he admitted under oath today in front of Congress that he had lunch with Jeffrey Epstein, with his family on Epstein's island. The White House pushed back and said he didn't do anything wrong. Having lunch is not criminal. What is your perspective on their response?
Well, it is not criminal. I mean, that is the truth, and I'm glad that he told the truth under oath today. As a mom, I wouldn't sit and have lunch with a convicted pedophile. I don't think that's something that I would personally do, but that's my personal choice.
Do you think he should resign?
No, I wouldn't go that far. He hasn't, I've not seen any evidence that he did anything wrong, or you shouldn't just be fired because of who you had lunch with. But I do question people who weren't straightforward, who weren't honest right away with the American public, and what are we hiding? I saw some names in there of people that I had no idea would be in the files, who were scheduling lunch or meetings with a convicted pedophile. Didn't do anything wrong, but certainly you question, wow, why are all these people, rich and powerful and famous, Hollywood, et cetera, doing this? But again, my focus is strictly on the victims, getting justice for them, people who broke the law and did crimes. That's not Howard Lutnick.
Yes.
That's not Donald Trump either.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the files have shown that Donald Trump actually was
exonerated,
a whistleblower against Maxwell and
I've been saying that for
Epstein
a long time.
In the early 2000s, and in fact talked to the FBI about a number of their crimes.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.